confess, I don't have many ideas about what we're supposed to be doing. I've got a lot of paperwork, a lot of people who commented. We have people who come to us who we should hear. And there's a process that was described in a memo that Brian gave to the city manager, and the city manager gave to the council pursuant to a council order. At last night's meeting, we got a copy of it later today, which describes the procedure. So one thing might be to ask Brian or the staff to kind of summarize where they think we are. Then we could hear from the public the ideas that they have. And then, given that we have 3 sort of hour-long things, I'd like this to be no more than an hour's discussion. So you want to kick it off, Brian?
Sure. So I think you do have materials from the city manager's presentation from last night. And I guess I'd say in general, I think maybe you've noticed the planning board's received a little bit more attention say, the past 6 or 8 months than it has in some past years. I think it's something that ebbs and flows in terms of how much focus there is in the planning board. In part, I think the focus is because of the significant number of projects that have been before. I mean, I think the board certainly is well aware of the fact that we've gone from sort of twice-a-month meetings to now more often than not having 3 times a month meeting, and some months actually pushing to 4. But I think through the concerns that people have raised as they've gone through it, I think it's given us an opportunity to think about how do we make this process work better for everybody involved? How do we make it so that it both is and feels more transparent, more understandable, more accessible to people? How do we make it so that it works more efficiently for people, I think, as well? Just sort of to take the opportunity to re-examine how we're going about sort of conducting the planning board process, particularly, I think, in the context of special permit review. I think that's where much of the focus has been. And I think as we've discussed in there were a few changes that we've already started to make, such as trying to provide a little bit of an overview at the start of the meeting, trying to provide a staff memo in as timely a manner as possible that allows for both the board and I think the public to have a better sense of sort of the staff's initial review of materials. And that's everything from sort of going over this particular special permit criteria, what the relief is that's being asked, what our thoughts are about it, to design review, where Susanna will sort of weigh in terms of what her thoughts are, and to try to present that to both the board and the public in a way that allows people to get their hands around a project a little bit more readily. One of the things I think that we've done in the past is, in an effort to try to keep things going, I would say we've sometimes been too accommodating about getting material in too late, or too accommodating about scheduling a continuation before having material. So again, one of the procedures that we've looked to try to do is to not schedule a continuation of a hearing until we have the material, so that again, the staff can review that material, provide guidance to the planning board, and provide guidance to the public as well for that review. So I think that's sometimes been something that's been a little bit troubling to developers perhaps, but I think it's something that's important to do to make sure that we can actually ensure that we've got the materials in a timely fashion to try to again address the work in a way that's more accessible and more transparent. One of the other concerns I think that we've heard was that people felt that sometimes the presentations were uneven, and that developers may not have always felt like that they were on as tight a clock as the members of the public. And I think recently the board's tried to hold people to more of the 25-minute time limit in terms of presentation, while also sort of allowing the public to to its time. Now, one of the issues that I don't think we have figured out, although we're trying different methods, is how to balance the desire for a complete hearing where both the developer gets to make his or her case and members of the public are allowed to weigh in their opinion, and still leave room for the board to breathe, for the board to actually consider what they've heard, to evaluate and to discuss it. And I think those of us involved in the process think that it's much richer when the board collectively has a chance to listen to each other and that there's a real synergy there. And so one of the things we've talked about is trying to use, to the extent possible, one of the meetings a month to allow that kind of deliberation, because we've heard from the board the frustration when you've got a hearing, you've got a presentation from the developer, you've got a hearing, and then there's not time for the board to listen and understand. So those are some of the changes that I think collectively both the board and the staff have tried to make as interim measures. I think there's several other issues that have been raised by members of the public so far. Some I think we're still trying to figure out the best way to address them. And one of the big ones is how best to formalize, whether that's through a zoning change, whether that's through planning board rules, changes to the city's design guidelines, but how to address the concern that neighbors have about timely notice for a project that's coming before them. If you go too soon, if a developer goes to the community too soon without enough information, I think the community sort of feels like, how are we supposed to react to this? We don't have something concrete enough to react to, or you must have plans and you're not sharing them with them. If they come too late, the community feels like, hey, this is baked. We're only allowed to sort of tinker at the edges. We're not getting a chance to sort of really engage in a process here. So I think one of the challenges for us as a community is to figure out how best to sort of find that sweet spot of what to do and how to do it. And one of the things that the staff has been working on, we're still working on, is trying to talk to other communities to see what they're doing. Different cities have tried some novel approaches. Some work better, some don't. But to try to get some more information to provide to the board. So I think that's a little bit of a backdrop, and I'd ask some other members of the staff. I may be forgetting things to add to it. But I think what we would hope would be that to hear from members of the public about sort of to amplify on those concerns and to raise others about how to make this process be one that is both better and equally feels better to the public. I think it's a situation where you will never be able to satisfy everyone. You're making decisions, and sometimes they're decisions that please some and displease others. But we do want to get to a point is where people feel like it is a open, transparent, accessible process, and one in which people feel like they have been heard, that they've been listened to, that they've been understood, even if they're not necessarily agreed with. And so I think the hope is to sort of hear a little bit more from members of the public tonight, for the board to give some thoughts about what are issues that they've felt as they've been wrestling with these issues, and to try to come to a place where we can improve the process. So Jeff or Stuart or Ram, I'm not sure if there's anything else that makes sense to add, or was it?
I'll just add one thing, maybe just to help in your initial comment, Mr. Chair, about how to think about and structure the discussion. What we've been considering as we've been looking at this issue is what are the sort of different parties involved and the different responsibilities that each of those parties can take on. So at the staff level, there are certain things that we have the ability to do administratively because we have the ability to meet with project proponents, property owners more regularly. Also, we can meet with neighbors outside of the formal meeting structure to talk about some of the issues that come up. But we're also constrained in some ways because by policies, procedures, regulations, things that we don't really have don't always have the power to change. There's the planning board, and the planning board has jurisdiction over its own rules and procedures. So one of the things for the board to think about are what are the things that could be done to facilitate the flow of the meetings and the process by which meetings take place, and also what kinds of directions the planning board can give to us to help guide our work and as well as to proponents. There are some interventions, as Brian mentioned, that would really be under the purview of the city council, and those would be the kinds of interventions that would involve zoning changes to create new regulations. The city council has a great amount of power in that respect, but it's also, as many people have pointed out, zoning regulations can be sort of a blunt instrument. So they can, they might not have the same kind of finesse that either the planning board working within its own procedures or staff might have. And then of course there's the developers and the project proponents themselves. And I think that in the end, as we look at project review and the role that all the public agencies play, we have to remember that this is their project. It's the proponent's project, it's the property owner's project, the developer, their team, and they are, in the end, they always have to bear some responsibility for the process that they undertake in order to advance their proposal. So that's sort of the breakdown that I try to think about in terms of organizing and processing the different things we could improve, and to think about what is really the best place to assign each of those types of initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Shall we proceed to the list? Okay, so we will ask people for their comments on this subject. And we will follow the ordinary rules we use for a public hearing, although this isn't exactly a public hearing or isn't advertised as such. But, and those rules are to come up to the microphone, to give your name and address, spelling your name for the recorder, and limiting your remarks to 3 minutes. So the first name on the list is John Hawkinson.
Good evening, members of the planning board. John Hawkinson, 84 Mass Ave. So I sent you a letter on October 6th, and I think many of you read it, and it covers a lot of ground, so I don't want to repeat all of it, but I do want to cover the high points. And I think it's really, public confidence in you all is at a pretty low point, and that's unfortunate. Some of that's because of perception, some of it's because of reality, but those problems need to be fixed regardless of whether they're real or perceived, because perception is a big deal. The planning board has to serve the public, and not all the public is familiar with your processes. Some of us are, many are not, and the staff and the board need to give the public a leg up so that they can compete with developers and meet them on a level playing field. I think really the first big issue is the website. It needs a lot of improvement. It's super hard to find things. Last meeting, Stuart ably tried to help James Williamson, none of them are dummies, find some relevant stuff on the website to the meeting, and it was disastrous. If you're familiar with it, you can find it, click, 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 4 clicks to find what you need, but it's super hard for new people. It needs to be a lot better. I gave you some specific recommendations that I asked you to direct staff to do. Some of them are technical. They might seem like they're hard. They really aren't. I have some automation that builds web pages and scrapes information off the website and reorganizes it so it's useful. It's useful to me. I'm happy to help CDD and IT and all those people make it work for everyone. The information is there. It's just an organization problem. Future meeting plans. We get an update at the beginning of every meeting from Brian. That stuff should be on the web and available for everyone. You shouldn't have to come to the planning board to find out what's going to be at the planning board the next week and to find the details. I understand that some of that stuff is tentative, but put it on the website and say that it's tentative. Similarly, there's a mailing list that gets copies of the agenda, but people don't know about it. You have to ask Liza, and you have to know to ask Liza. There's insufficient detail on the agenda. It's pretty clear from this week's agenda, same problem. This discussion doesn't have a time on it. It doesn't have any background. It really just doesn't tell you what you need to know. It's super easy to be better, so please do. But now let me come to you all, not just this. Oh, but first, all these items for the staff. It's one thing for me to say it to the staff. It's a very different thing for you all to say it to the staff. So please tell the staff that there are things they need to do. They listen to you in a way that's very different from how they listen to me and to the public, and that's rightly so. So it's your responsibility to direct the staff. But to you then, you need to allow your responsibilities under Chapter 81 or whatever it is, are more than just special permits. They're about planning for the city, master planning, regular planning, all that stuff. In reality, the staff does a lot of that, and that's fine. But you provide oversight, and you need to provide time for yourself to review that. I suggest in my memo that once a month you should stop and think about those things. But that's just a suggestion, but you need to do it at some point, on some semi-regular basis. Hopefully it's not years. I think once a month is good, but 2, 3 months, whatever. Choose what time is right, but stop and periodically reflect and review the status of planning in the city and look at things. That's super important. Similarly, I
John,
think...
are you winding down?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Similarly, I think you need an open discussion, a time for people to come forth and bring open issues before you, because you're not very approachable, and you could be better about that. So, thank you all.
Thanks, John. Next is Ruth Allen.
Just a little. Hi, my name is Ruth Ryan Allen. I live at 48 Fennell Street, Cambridge. I also own property at 260 Walden Street in Cambridge. When I was listening to the meeting last night and the procedures, I know everything is a volunteer, and I appreciate everything that you guys do. I know I've been here on multiple things in multiple areas in our neighborhood. But one specific thing is sort of preempting, obviously, me being here. But it is the planning piece, the urban planning piece. I feel like all these developments are coming up around, and we're not finding out until the last possible minute. We do need to get a little bit more proactive as a city, because I plan on being here for the rest of my life, and my kids too, and I'm 4th generation. So there are some people here that aren't hit and runs, and I feel that some of these developers are hit and runs. And you guys are our first line of defense. The transparency is not there for us. The neighborhoods are not finding out about this until somebody overheard this or somebody overheard that. Even though the developers are coming to us and saying, oh, don't worry about it, there are no plans. And then the next day we find out, oh, there's like a bunch of plans and they've had 3 revisions. But because they're within a certain guideline, they're able to hide it. And they don't necessarily have to come, but they should be coming to you, and they should be coming to the neighborhood. The transparency right now is horrible, and I think that's where we're becoming more reactionary instead of proactive. I look forward to the community development, maybe even taking a little stronger stand to find out what's going on in the neighborhoods, and then bringing it to you guys, because I know the special permits are like off the wall, and unfortunately, sometimes we have to require you guys to look at special permits to get the whole development or the whole project that's coming up, because we don't know about it. And I thank you for your time, and I know it's very difficult. I couldn't do it myself with those FARs and everything else that you have to figure out. I don't know, but all I do know is that the people that do know it aren't telling the people that are staying here in Cambridge what's happening. And as I said, I applaud you for volunteering, and we just need to know. We just need to have a little bit more information for us regular guys that are staying here. All right, so thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Madeline Fletcher. And after Madeline will be Nancy Ryan.
My name is Madeline Fletcher, and I live at Grove Street in Cambridge. And several things have brought me here. One is that I'm on a committee for Christchurch Cambridge that's interested in a little bit of what has already been said, city planning, a sense of community where the community is feeling isolated from developments, a concern for conservation and water, which was discussed in the meeting. I mean, we had 2-3 meetings in which issues came up of this sort, and I'm hoping that the direction in which people are expressing this will progress in a nice way, and then I can go back and report some progress to the church, or a way ahead on all these issues which people have already discussed. Thank you.
Ma'am, could I ask where Christ Church is? I don't know which one
It's
it
in
is.
Harvard Square,
Oh, it's the one in the
across
corner?
the street
No.
from
No.
Harvard University, on Mass Ave.
Garden
It's, as you go on Garden Street, it's Zero Garden
Oh,
Street.
I know exactly.
You know where
Yes, yes.
The old cemetery is,
Sure,
it's
yeah.
on one
I
side.
know exactly which one it
Right.
is. Thank you.
I think General Washington worshiped there, among other people.
Good evening, I'm Nancy Ryan, RYAN at 4 Ashburton Place. I really appreciated John Hawkinson's, and say your name again, Ruth? Ruth, and Ruth Ryan, we're cousins somewhere along the line. Comments and the tone of them. I have submitted in behalf of a group representing 5 different neighborhood organizations, a lot of detail to you all about what we would hope to change, both with the staff and with your procedures and practices. Appreciated Brian's 5 points last night about how the staff can work differently with the board. I think that'll create enormous improvement. Really relieved to hear the city manager last night say that he would provide to both you and the staff more consultants in areas where we wouldn't necessarily have someone right on staff. I know one of you asked for an engineering report that might help us understand how flooding could affect a neighborhood as a result of a large development. So I'm really hoping to hear from you all. It may not be tonight, but whenever it is, about what you're thinking as a result of all of the storm and drawing of the last 5 or 6 months, and how you imagine that you would like to see how this board could function to the best, to make the best use of all of your skills and wisdom, and to make it better for the neighborhoods. So a few of the things that we've seen is that we really want you to take a good look at your own rules. In fact, I've been involved with at least 2 projects where the developer absolutely ignored the neighborhood groups. One of it in my own neighborhood, and then the other, another neighborhood. So your own rules say strongly encourage the developer to come and to the neighborhood before they come here. I'm actually involved in a project to try to see if we can't make that a regulation. Residents testifying, people have talked about that. We really need to have a fairer, more even playing field. And the whole issue of how the special permit criteria and the design review criteria are utilized and interpreted by you all, that's been a big problem for a lot of us, to not feeling that you have taken the broadest possible look at what the design review and special project criteria really represent in terms of the impact of a development on a neighborhood. So that's just a few of the things I'd like to say, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you all, so thank you.
Thank you. Jan Devereaux. After Jan, Mary Staples. Oh, I guess she doesn't want to speak, so that would be Sarah Kennedy. Sorry.
Hi, good evening, Jan Devereaux, Lakeview Avenue. I am going to take far less than 3 minutes because I feel like I've already spent an awful lot of time over the last 9 months talking here and about process and procedure. And I think my views are pretty well known. And I wanted just to put in, I can't really add much to what Nancy just said because I've been working closely with her, so we're pretty much of the same mind on a lot of those points. But I did want to put in a plug. We talked about 3D models at a few of the meetings, and I think we're now talking about process, which I feel is very detail-oriented, but throughout this discussion we've talked a lot about context and the bigger picture, and not just looking at projects piecemeal, but really looking at the bigger picture. So I do think requiring models of some kind would be really helpful to reminding ourselves that it's not just about the building, but it's about where the building is going to live, because we all have to live with that building. And another thing, and I don't know whether it's technically feasible, is that it would be really nice if we didn't have to actually physically be here every Tuesday, those of us who feel that we need to be for one reason or another. And if we could work out to have these streamed in some way, it would be great. And you know, there are awful lot of people in the neighborhoods who are really following all of this very closely, but they're just simply not able to come out and devote several hours on a Tuesday evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Kennedy. And after Sarah Kennedy, Langley Keys.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Kennedy, Director of Government Affairs at the Chamber of Commerce here in Cambridge. Just here to make some commentary on behalf of the Chamber and our membership on the planning board process. Over the years, we've been impressed by the breadth of expertise, knowledge, and commitment displayed by the volunteer planning board members and the city staff who work in tandem. In recent months, we know that a variety of stakeholders have raised concerns about the planning board process. We're encouraged that the city has been responsive in designing a multi-pronged approach to solicit feedback and suggestions. This feedback will hopefully assist the planning board and the community development department in upholding our shared community standards throughout a project's development trajectory. Many of the inherent challenges in the process are part of Massachusetts State Law Chapter 40A and the current Cambridge zoning requirements. The special permit granting process, for example, is lengthy by design. This process includes multiple public hearings with sometimes hours of public commentary, intensive multi-phase design review, and often drastic changes to the original proposed design, most in response to neighborhood concerns. The end result in each approved special permit has been a building that has gone through layers of review, changes and feedback from a wide range of interested parties. We can all agree that the process at times is arduous and daunting, but we applaud the city for taking a clean look at the practice and examining ways to streamline where necessary, and providing an opportunity for all to be engaged in the outcome. And the Chamber really looks forward to being a part of this conversation as it moves forward.
Thank you. Langley Keys, and after Langley Keys, Carol O'Hare.
Langley Keys, 92 Chilton Street. Good evening. It's nice to be here again. I appreciate enormously this opportunity to convey some thoughts we have about future activities of the board. I'd like to put my comment just in the context of reframing and reflecting on the Cambridge Planning Board's mandate. Now, it seems to me that the mandate of the Planning Board is really very different than the process and procedures and participation issues, which have really absorbed a lot of time and an understandable and important concern. What I would like to focus on is the issue of mandating, what it is that in fact the Planning Board is supposed to do. And I think there are three ways or three aspects of that mandate, which I will try to get through in 3 minutes, which just happens to be that I don't have a lot to do. And in a sense, these are informed by my experience in both going to a number of planning board meetings and also, and I've told you this before, and it's something that sticks with me, reading through all the transcripts of all the PB decisions in the Alewife Park area, which I think is an exercise which I commend again to everyone, at least once in their life. So my concerns come out of that engagement. And the first one of that, and this is something that Nancy mentioned, and I'll go through it quickly, which is basically the whole issue of is how broad are the check marks that you make? How many boxes do you check when you make a decision? Is it really, to go to the bottom line, is this really an expanded architectural review board, or is it a planning board which is concerned with the project in context, the project in situ, the project in place, and that's what drives the discussion of the building, not the other way around. There's a lot of ways of putting that, but I think there's not really a consensus on that. I think the board has moved a long way from that memorable hearing last April when there was discussion of a lot of things beside mandate. But it's still, I think, not clear and ought to be crystal clear how many boxes there are, how broad they are, and what you really have the right and the responsibility and the freedom to engage in. So that's the first one, and I think that's an issue of getting that down so it's clear to everyone. The second one is really something that I don't think we talk much about. This is a special permit. It's a special, why is it special? It's special because the public sector is giving something to a private developer that they want, which they would not otherwise have unless given to them by the public. Question, what is the public getting back for the giving of that special permit? Does the private developer simply get it by right, or is there some reciprocal relationship here that in some sense it's a two-way street? If it is a two-way street, I think there should be discussion as that part of that issue, which is part of, again, the mandate of the board. What, in terms of its public role and looking at it in terms of public purpose, is it getting back from a developer who's going to get a great deal out of you in terms of the permit they get? And third, and this is something that's been mentioned before, is this whole question of the proactive role of the CDD and how it relates to the planning board. And I would just urge that there is a lot more possibility there.
The board's approval, I'd ask him to complete his remarks.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, it's just that relationship and a proactive role on the part of the CDD, not a kind of, here's a few facts. I'd rather see it in terms of information and almost even a point of view and a narrative which says to you all, here's what we think, not just laying out the facts. So it's basically these three aspects of a mandate of the board. How broad are the boxes is number one. What's the public purpose, what in the special permit? And third, this much closer proactive relationship between the planning board and the CDD staff. Thank you very much for the extra time.
Thank you.
My name is Carol O'Hare, 172 Magazine Street. Thank you. I was very pleased, as you might expect, to hear your discussion about the sign, and want to say that one of the problems, and I'm going to use that presentation as an example of one of the concerns relating to all of this. One of the problems is that the information provided, I found it at ISD. I saw, and Liza sent me what she had, but there was no way of determining that that sign was on Land Boulevard. And so I broadcast, as you probably know, to all my sign people and the community groups that it is facing the river, and I'm embarrassed, Beacon Hill. I'm embarrassed because it's not that I approve that sign, and I'm taking this occasion just because it is an object lesson or case study about your process with regard to signs, which I think you are now you are honing in on the problem, which is that if this body continues enabling the zoning board to sign by sign variance the entire city, it's making a mockery out of our zoning ordinance. It is a total joke. And they're popping up, as some of you have said, all over the place. They don't have to be branding signs. They can be address signs that are way too big, that are way too bright, that are way too high. There is no basis for these signs. The signage ordinance is pretty darn reasonable. And so I would encourage you to let people speak on these zoning matters that you are recommending. You're making recommendations to the zoning board. If you okay it, or okay it with little tweaks, the zoning board, which is just gung-ho on signs except for one outspoken member, the former chair, they want to please the developer. If you don't let the public speak at your processes where you review these signs and antennas that get variances, it's just wasting everybody's time. I am sick of doing this. I would rather be doing the work that Nancy Ryan and other constant citizens are doing, and that your staff is doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Spent the first I looked at that information, I said, it's facing the river, it's outrageous. And after I read your thing, I thought, maybe it's not facing the river.
Oh, really?
And because there was one piece that didn't make sense, the drawing that they gave us.
Oh, right.
I went to Google Maps and I said, okay, where does this occur facing the river? And it doesn't, this piece doesn't face the
Well,
river.
it's true that when I went to.
But I shouldn't have to go to Google Maps.
No, and
Yeah.
I should not have to do a site visit, which I did.
Right.
It's absurd because why don't they name the address where the fire department, where the taxis, where the entire public goes? And as somebody said, no wonder the taxi couldn't find it. They have flags saying 55 Cambridge Parkway on Land Boulevard. Sorry for my hyper right now.
Are there other people who wish to speak? Yes.
My name is Walter McDonald. I live at 172 Magazine Street. I would just plead with you to make it clear in public announcements about the agenda for meetings, those subjects on which you will entertain public comment. I have come to meetings when all of a sudden it's announced that there will be no public comment, and I have no idea why, but at least you could give notice about whether there will be public comment on those things. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Elon Levy.
Good evening. I'm glad to be able to talk about the process rather than the project. I would like to mention that one of my big frustrations, one of the things I don't understand is a lot of what has been said before, but I think one mention that I haven't heard is about that famous Article 1043 of the ordinance, which talks about the public interest that you have to defend, and that often in many of the way that the decision-making process is going, we don't feel, and that I'm saying we because I've spoken with others who feel the same way, that the public interest is actually defended, that it is taken into consideration during the process. And therefore, what happens is that it seems that the voice of the community is not heard, because I think that the community has at heart the public interest in mind. And when we don't see that public interest in your decision and in the way that you ask the question and the way you discuss, and I can talk about the courthouse as being significant in that aspect. We had many hours, the same way as for the parkway, but for Fresh Pond. But for the courthouse, we had many hours of public comment. And when it actually came to the discussion and the decision, none of those public comments were taken in consideration. I can tell you that all of the members of the community that I'm just giving you our perspective. Maybe it is, but I don't see it and I don't feel it. And when maybe when I'll read the actual result, then we'll take it. But we really, I can tell you that as a community, it's something that struck us, that it felt like the community input had not been taken into consideration. And in the idea of 1043, I don't know if it's something that's applicable all the time, but that idea and the fact that it's written the public interest, that you're defending the public interest, that part seems to always be missing. And I don't know how you change the process to make that come to the forefront so that we feel that in a more clear way that our participation actually matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Carlin.
Here I go by the name of Dennis. I'm speaking as a citizen, not Dennis Carlo, 9 Washington Avenue. I had the pleasure of doing a lot of work with the board in the past and a lot of design review. And PowerPoint presentations are wonderful because the guy giving it or the woman giving it is in control. And yes, you can go back to slide 14 and slide 7, but just that movement shifts information. And what I heartily recommend is to let them do PowerPoint presentations. But once you have a PowerPoint presentation, you can easily make boards, and big boards, so that you can have a line of boards along the rail that you've created, and have a reference that you can see the plans, the elevations, the site plan. You have it all there, large photographs. The model, when we did design review, we almost exclusively focused on the model. And I concur with what everybody said earlier about that, because you can see how the model relates to the area and the different focus points. It doesn't have to be a super finished model. It can be a study model for the site model, and as the building develops, then it gets more specific. Now this might, the next thing I'm going to say relates to that. It might already be in the works, and but it's important for the public, and I think you, to hear the staff comment on design review. Yes, the written report is great, but you can better explain all the pieces in person, as I said, pointing to the model. And frankly, the development team can hear it and understand it better. But then the public knows that that area has been discussed, and either discussed well, or it stimulates conversation later. It'll stimulate you, I have no doubt about it, on raising other issues. I do appreciate what the professor did. It's easy to focus on the building because that's what's in front of us. But how does that embellish the street? How does that make the street better? How does that make the neighborhood better? That is the key, and I think that's what we have to ask for in return. We had many discussions on Essex Street, the little building, and the sidewalk width. I'm a big fanatic that a sidewalk has to be big enough for two people to walk by each other and not hit a sign or a swinging door. Essex Street won't have that unless the sidewalk's widened, and I'm trying to do that. Things like that. That's what you're giving to the neighborhood. Does it make the street, does it heal the street? Does it knit the street back together, especially if it's an empty hole right now? Does the project help create place or reinforce place? That's urban design 101. Does it make Central Square better? Does it make Alewife? Does it help create a place at Alewife? Wherever, East Cambridge, I mean, whatever the neighborhood is, whatever the issues are. How are the city goals enhanced beyond the building itself? That's what planning is all about. That's what the professor was talking about. I mentioned the pedestrian way. I mentioned the embellishment of a street. There's nothing more dull than the same material on the whole building. That's not architecture. That's construction. How does it add to the public domain, especially large projects? How does it embellish the public domain in the sense of creating other open space, creating an extra streetway, especially in Cambridge Triangle, Alewife Triangle? And relativity, it's something I call relativity. Most people think of physics, but the bigger a building gets or a complex gets, the more it should have elements that humanize it, not less, to compensate for that. And that again is the public domain. Warmer materials. I'm going to talk about materials last. You heard me on that before. Warmer materials, articulation, embellishing human scale, silhouette, just goes on and on. The bigger, it's not a single home, it's not a 3-family. All of a sudden it's a 96 family unit. So to me, that puts the onus on the developer. And I realize as architects, we're looking from the inside out, but the planning board, and I am convinced developers and architects will get the inside out right. It's where the architects and developers of the outside in, how it fits in. And I know we've talked about this before, but I think anything that's a special permit, the quality of materials should be there past any of us in this room. And what's getting approved won't be. It will be altered within 20 years. We're asking for water leakage, and some of these housing developments will be sold within 6 to 8 years after the tax benefits. So I just encourage that we, and I say the council too, I am bringing up the council, of looking at the urban design criteria and expanding it to be what planning is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charles T., 23 Edmund Street. I'm going to be hopefully very brief, 5 points. I hope you paid very close attention to the people who spoke before me. I think just well thought out, especially John Hawkinson's memo, especially the web streaming to really make this public. And Lane Key's his comments on basically quid pro quo for a special permit. And I would suggest that that Rich McKinnon at 88 Cambridge Park Drive be your standard, not the exception. Because with the Bishop petition, we got a 30% reduction, which got, I think, Cambridge Lumber to come out very, very nicely. The second is during the Bishop petition was the first time opponents got to use PowerPoint and in the presentation, and then we went on and we did it during the courthouse. I would like to formalize that procedure, and so where if a sufficient number of people cede their time and they don't get to speak, so we're not increasing the length of the meeting. In fact, we might decrease it, that a group gets to do an alternative PowerPoint. But formalize that. You've done it informally. I think it's great. As 2 more things that were both actual policy orders passed by the City Council in the past. I would ask that you communicate the positive respect to the City Council, the City Manager, and to the staff, so that there be a CDD staff member assigned to the public. And it was, I think, in the policy order, it's in the ombudsman, but someone to guide people through the process. So things that people come in and they're just not, you're not getting yelled at because people don't understand the process. And it is a complex process, as has been mentioned. 3D models, that was also a policy order, but I'm more in your camp of 3D computer models rather than the physical models. I think, but to have that be open and accessible to the public too, so they can go and get their views. And then finally, if someone comes in and presents a PowerPoint, that has to get posted on the website. That's shown in public. Those slides should be up the next day on the website, and I would like to make that a requirement. So please, I hope you paid attention and took careful notes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee Ferris, 269 Norfolk Street. Super brief. I'm sorry I was late due to another city meeting, and so I don't know all what has been mentioned, so I apologize if this duplicates, but the perception that Ilan Levy was talking about, that the public feels not listened to, I think one very simple way to address that would be in your written decisions. So you could say, for example, we heard these 10 points frequently made by the public, and whether you agreed or disagreed with the public, and whether the public concerns are even something that you can comment on, are within your purview, because that's one of the things that you guys have said, is that we're asking for things where the zoning would need to be changed, and therefore you can't do it. So I'd like to get that kind of stuff in writing, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. So that's just one simple idea. And then I really appreciate the CDD's effort to put materials on the website, particularly their memos in which they're gathering input from all the city staff that's going to you guys to help you. And there is sometimes still a timeliness issue with those materials, so it would be great if there could be sort of a pretty clear-cut time frame by when they're going to be posted, and I don't think that community groups should be held to the same time standard as city staff. So I really hope that that can get ironed out, because you know, if resident groups want to try to engage on the correct terms, those city memos are extremely helpful and important, and we do need some. We can't see them on Friday and be here on Tuesday. That's just too short of a time frame. So thanks, those are my couple of suggestions.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Hi, Peggy Barnes-Leonard, 115 Fairweather Street, and I'll be brief. I think for myself, and reflecting on being involved in coming to the planning board with projects, and what people are saying in some is how to have an inclusive, transparent, and participatory process on projects before they come here, so that you're not, so the first opportunity for the public to participate and have feedback happens here in this forum. And I think that the suggestions that I can see David Chilinsky had submitted to you regarding having a CBD project manager work with the community, help you to lay this on, anything that can facilitate having this transparent process and have the public be participating before it comes to you, when it's really at the point where you can't necessarily redesign the project totally at this point. It's been put together. That would be appreciated. And what to me seems to be the element missing is that, and it's being referred to, I think, by Dennis Carlone, and by Langley Keys, is thinking of projects in situ, in context. And we do have this out there that there's going to be some sort of a master plan happening. And it is missing. And right now there's such pressure for large projects, impactful projects coming before you, that millions of square feet are being asked to be permitted. And as myself, as a resident, I guess I'm looking to, well, where is the open space going to be? Where's the flooding mitigation going to be? Where are the plans for the infrastructure, traffic, ways in which these projects will find a way to create space, knit together a community. So thank you for your volunteer efforts.
Thank you. I've made some notes going along. They're certainly not comprehensive. It's kind of little pieces. Maybe I'll start the discussion by going through the notes I've done and ask others to these are sort of all the generally things that could be clearer, could be made clearer. So I was very interested in the notion of public interest that Langley Keys brought up, because he's suggesting that it's something different than what's in the ordinance. And I've always felt that the public interest was embodied in the ordinance, the public goals, the things that we wanted for the public space in the city, we wanted in terms of impacts, all of that was embodied in the ordinance, and that our major rule was to say, well, did the project achieve that? Now, there's a suggestion that, no, that's not the public interest, that the public interest is something else. I will note that when the council does rezonings, I'm always amazed at what they extract from tough guys like MIT. And that's the way the council thinks, that every project should have some other list of benefits that isn't in the ordinance, isn't something that is a criteria for granting a permit, but is something. So clarifying that for everybody, I think would be helpful. The suggestion was made that we should think about the zoning review process, the zoning case review process. It's a little piece of what we do, and I think we're very reluctant to have it become a big piece of what we do. We don't want to hold a separate hearing. The hearing is being held before the Board of Zoning Appeal. We tend to our zoning appeals are to say, is there a planning issue around the cases? And we only comment on maybe 10% of the cases. In terms of the cell towers, I would like very much for that to become much more of a staff function. I think the staff, has that expertise that is equal to our own, and that would help process. That then perhaps comes to one of the huge questions: the staff versus of the CDD versus the planning board. Now, if you read the State Enabling Act, it's written for the 300 or so towns in the Commonwealth that don't have planning staffs, or maybe have a part-time planner. And so it invests responsibilities in the planning board to deal with planning issues in the town. Boston has its own act that governs how it functions, or how it's supposed to function. I do a rough calculation, which is I take the number of hours the planning board spends times the number of members, and I compare that to the number of hours that the staff spends. And it usually comes out that the staff spends somewhere between 95 and 99% of the total amount of time that's spent on planning in the city. So the notion that we are directing the activities of the staff is not correct. Someone said we should tell the staff to do something. We always request the staff does something, but in fact, we've been trying, and in recent years more effectively, to work closely together to understand the roles that the board brings and that the expertise the staff brings, making that clearer to everybody, to you, to us, and to the people, the staff sitting in the front row, the people who are sitting beyond the front row, who are trying to fit into that system to give the advice to the city about what's going on. That's a very important task. That might end up going to the legislature. Because my gut feeling is we don't actually do what the law tells us to do on planning. We're trying to be sensible and take advantage of the fact that we've got a big staff, we have a rich city, and we do a lot of planning, and it's done by the staff. Pre-planning board meetings with neighborhoods, I think we could just change that, strongly suggest to a mandate in our rules. We could do it at the next meeting if we decided we wanted to do it. I think we ought to behave as if it says you must do it. That strongly recommended means there are no excuses accepted. How to deal with the problem of enough time at hearings? A simple answer, only schedule one important public hearing at a meeting. It's very simple. It's impractical, but it is simple. I'm not sure it ultimately saves any time to do it the way we're doing it now. And so maybe we should try it that way and see what happens. And here's something which I'm scared to talk about, which is public input. Because I'm scared because I might say what I really think, which is most public input at our hearings isn't very helpful. And so we sit here for hours and hours, and tonight has actually been quite an exception to that. And so I think there's a problem with that. And I don't think it's telling people out there, oh, just be more disciplined and do your homework and talk about what we're interested in. I think we have to understand why, what we're looking for from the public, and what we can reasonably expect, and what tools the public need to give us what we would like to get. When I was on the zoning board, and then Tom was on the zoning board at a different time, I always loved it when the abutters came, because they were people who were really interested. And they would talk about what their interests were, and that was wonderful. They were giving us hard information. And it's like, that's, to me, is the most important thing, is knowing what people, the particular knowledge they have about the case that's in front of us, that can help us, can expand our understanding. Now, you don't have to be a butter to do that. I'm thinking of somebody, probably in this room, who came to us and said, have you thought about the noise at the loading dock at Whole Foods that's right across the railroad tracks from 75 New Street? Well, I hadn't. No, that was, and well, maybe we should have. But somebody did think about it and came and said, you think about it. That was wonderful. I find the 3-minute limit frustrating. I don't like having to ask people to stop talking. I kind of feel like this is a democracy. People should be able to come and talk. But when the sheer volume of the talking prevents us from doing our part of the business, that's a problem. And the 3-minute rule is just kind of a very crude tool to try to help, and I'm not sure how. Things have gotten a lot better since the 3-minute rule came into place, because people, I think, tended to focus on their comments beforehand and plan them out, and that is helpful. But I think, let's not ignore that from our point of view, the public input is often not helpful. And if we could try to figure out why and how to help that. So the question, what's wrong with the planning board? Now, I didn't go to the city council meeting last night. I didn't view it. My sole knowledge as somebody who was there sent me an email message saying that Councilor Toomey spoke in our favor. which implied, I guess. It wasn't constantly to be, you said it. So, by and large, people don't complain about our BZA recommendations. And they don't more complain about our CELTOR recommendations, and nobody seems to complain much about our talking about zoning amendments. It's all about the special permits. And the litany is, it's 49-0 or 62-0 or whatever it is, that we in general review projects, subject them to scrutiny, get changes if they're needed, and then approve them. That's what we do. And that's what people wish we didn't do. Some people, in every case, wish we didn't do that. So, I think we have to go beyond the thing that's saying we can't make everybody happy to go into the deeper question as to what do people expect us to do? And I think it came in the comment tonight from Mr. Levy, I think, which was, you didn't pay attention to us. And I think the answer that came to my mind was, we paid attention to what we could pay attention to. We heard everything, it came in, but when we came out with our decisions, we were making our decisions according to the findings that were required to be made. And then there's another note is handoff responsibilities. There are a lot of suggestions. Way to fix the planning board is to hand its real responsibilities to somebody else. Because anybody else will do it better, I guess. Like the city council, like a civilian design review, or a city design review board that's different than what the planning board does. And here, it's like, hand our responsibilities to the neighborhoods. And the thing is, we actually rely a lot upon neighborhood review and neighborhood comments, things that happen. People say, well, we don't find out about anything until like a week before the planning board hearing. Well, we don't find out about it until Friday, because that's when our package comes. I was looking at today's cases, and I was on O'Brien Highway, and there's a Marriott Hotel under construction, nearly done on O'Brien Highway, where I think there used to be a sausage plant. And I didn't know about that building. We don't actually ever know about buildings that we don't see. Looks okay. I'm curious that it's as small as it is, to tell you the truth, because there's a 12-story building behind it, which is really why I was out looking there. The other thing is about, are we doing building review or are we doing urban design review? I think that needs a little bit of clarification. I think our mandate is to do urban design review. And so when a building faces a street, we tend to look at that face and say, well, is that a good face for that street? And if it faces somebody's backyard, we tend to say, well, is that good face for the people who are looking not from the street, but from their own houses in the back? Getting more clarity on is good. I think the suggestions that, it's only been like 2 years that we've been getting regular staff reports. The previous CDD person, I think, basically told the staff they shouldn't open their mouths in public, particularly to the planning board. It was a very tight control regime. And we have an enlightened regime. And we're trying to learn how to make it all work. So right now we're in sort of this transition period where we get a written report that's it's very measured and it's careful. It talks about issues. And sometimes, you can say things like, whenever I get a hard email from somebody, I call them up on the phone. I don't want to have that hard response in the email. I want to talk to them and have a conversation. And so I think things can be said in the meeting, although they'll, of course, be faithfully recorded, but where you can be a little more forthcoming about your opinions. And maybe it's clear that they are your opinions when you're actually speaking them. But we're interested in opinions. And I don't know, I'm kind of wondering, but these are the things that sort of puzzle me in this whole process. So who would like to go next?
Well, I'm very proud of what the planning board has done in the years that I've been on the board and the years before that, before I was on the board. And I think it's interesting that it was probably less than a year ago that there was a celebration of what Roger Booth and CDD and the whole city had done, and there was this love fest about how wonderful everything had been in the city and how beautiful it had turned out and the changes that had been made. And it's, somewhat inexplicable that we went from 9 months or a year ago to this is great to we're broken. And I don't believe that. And I think indeed there are a lot of procedural things that we can do, and there are a lot of process things that we can do to make things clearer to the public. I also think that the statistic of 49-0 is the most meaningless statistic around, because the way this board operates and the way staff operates is that they go through many, many iterations of a project until it comes to us, and then we work on it over a number of hearings until we reach a point where we believe that it is in compliance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance for the granting of a special permit. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that if a special permit is denied, it doesn't mean nothing is going to be built. There is an underlying zoning ordinance that allows things to happen. And generally, the projects that come to us, even though what the public may mostly feel they're seeing is that, oh, you're getting developer is getting a special benefit. It's actually by following the requirements of the ordinance for a special permit, the public interest, the city at large, is getting a benefit and a better building and a better project. Now, do I think everything that's gone has been the best it could possibly be? No, of course not. There are trade-offs at all stages. But I think, when we vote, we're almost always unanimous. We come from very different backgrounds. We have very different ideas. We come from different neighborhoods. And yet, at the conclusion, when we vote, we almost always agree that this is in compliance with the ordinance. This is what is the best project at this moment for this particular location in accordance with the ordinance. Now, of course, some people agree and like it, and some people disagree vehemently and think it's the worst thing in the world. but we're always constantly, you know, there's a balancing act. If we say, if we're thinking that the city needs greater density, well, that's going to mean you're going to have bigger buildings. And the people who say, who don't like bigger buildings, and who say you're taking away my sky and my view, that's their point of view, and it's a perfectly valid point of view. It's just one that has to be weighed against another point of view and go where the city wants to go at that time. So a lot of it is the zoning ordinance, a lot of it is a master plan, a lot of it is the various design guidelines, and, you know, we have to try to put that all together, and we clearly welcome and need the input from everybody else. But when looking at any one project, whether it's in East Cambridge or North Cambridge or West Cambridge, people tend to think, yes, this is a good idea, but not in my neighborhood. Let's put it in some other neighborhood. And so if every neighborhood is saying the same thing, nothing is going to happen. And the city has goals and desires that have been incorporated into the zoning ordinance. And this is what we're trying to do, trying to balance all these things, and definitely relying upon staff and their expertise to get us at that point. So that's where I'm coming from, what I think the board is doing and has been doing. And I think it's going to have to continue that way, because otherwise nothing will be accomplished in the city. I mean, yes, I agree, there are a lot of procedural things we need to do. I'm a proponent of very strict agendas and strict time limits. So I think if we say a hearing is going to start at 8 and the next hearing is going to start at 9:30, that's what happens. We stop at 9:30 and we say, fine, we will continue this hearing to another date and people will come back. And I think that allows the public to know what their time scheme is, and it allows staff to know what time scheme is, and it allows us to end up having time to have our own discussions. I would like to see that tried. I mean, I understand there are negatives to it, that some people say I can't come out week after week to a hearing. But I think it can be worked out, and I think the ideas of streaming the hearings or having them broadcast over cable TV is a great idea. You know, I think John Hawkinson has a lot of very good ideas. I think definitely, I use the website all the time. I don't get these packages. I download everything off of the website. It's there, but it is difficult to find. And it would be nice if it was all clearer and if it was easier to use. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is really echoing what Hugh said, is that, you know, a lot has gone into the project before it ever comes to us. And usually the neighborhoods and the abutters have seen it before we've seen it, at various stages before we get it. And so when you think that a presentation of maybe 25 or 30 minutes or something is long from the developer, that's because it's the first time we, as a board, have ever seen it. You've probably seen it, and staff's seen it, and we've received materials, but, you know, we're just looking at it on paper, we're reading about it, we don't have somebody making a presentation about it, and yes, definitely, either a 3D model or a 3D renderings would be a great help. Whether they're needed in every case, I don't know, but I think, you know, it would be great to have them in much more frequency. But, you know, we do really welcome your input and need your input. But as he says, the repetition doesn't necessarily help us when we're sitting here for an hour or 2 hours listening to the same thing. We know there's a lot of traffic. We know there's parking problems. We know this building may be taller than a lot of people like. You know, almost all of us, I'd say, go and make site visits in advance to see the area, to walk around. We all live here. You know, we drive the same streets, we take the same T. But it is the comments that we haven't heard, and, you know, it's great, you know, we get emails, we get to read these things in advance, we get to focus on some things, but it really is great when you get, you know, the person who says, did you think about this? And, oh, gee, maybe I never thought about that. So we're not trying to stifle input. We welcome and cherish the input, but it's the repetition that I think makes us seem like maybe we're not listening or not paying attention, but we really are. And, you know, I think there are a lot of process things we can do and need to do, but personally, I think we're a good board that does good work, and, you know, we don't want to toss the baby out with the bathwater.
I just have a few comments. Ted, you echoed my thoughts very well. I think the website could certainly be improved. It sounds like I don't really go there that often because I do get a lot of written material. But the items that we look at for the approval of special for special permits should be, I guess, up on the website so that the public can take a look at that and say, okay, the planning board is looking at these particular items. I think, you know, I heard that tonight somewhere in the public comment. And also, CDD comments are very helpful. I think we've only been getting those for the past year or so. I don't know, year or two, but I find them very helpful. And let's see what else. The gentleman who said that, you know, okay, what is reciprocal? What is the public getting back from the special permits? Usually, when we look at a project, we make sure that we get something back, whether that be trees planted or public open space or sidewalks expanded. There's, you know, we always look for something that will improve the project for the public. I guess I don't think I just speak for myself. Of the years that I've been on the board, I feel as though that happens in general. I like the idea of streaming the meetings for people who can't get here, for people who have families and, you know, can't get here. Let me see. Oh, I do have a question. You know, it intrigues me that over the, you know, I've been on the board now for 14 years, and it just intrigues me that over the past year, it feels like to me that people are, you know, I don't know whether it's that there's more construction going on or what's going on, but that people are very not happy with the planning board and our decisions and the way in our process. And we, for many years, met twice a month. And then about 2 years ago or so, we upped that to 3 times a month because we were getting out of here at midnight. And we're still getting out of here most times at midnight or 11 o'clock or whatever. We're still, so I don't quite understand why that's happening, if there's more development that's been going on or, you know, or what's happening. Hugh, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, you have to admit, we are...
Right, we're spending more time. I think there have been a few particular cases that have taken a lot of time, and that there are more cases than on average. Some of those have taken a lot more time. And there have been more zoning amendments that take away from the project review, except you might say, well, zoning amendments are planning, we should like them. But anyway, sorry.
Okay, all right. So, you know, so we put a lot of effort and time into this, and you know, I'm very proud of the work that the board does, and one more item, calendar of meetings. I could swear that that's on the website, and it's there for the public to see. And am I correct in that? Yes. Yeah. No?
Oh, it is there for things that are finalized, but not things that are in draft. And the penciled in information is very helpful to know.
About the upcoming meetings, when I looked at it, like, well, I don't know, maybe it's what I get from Liza, but I thought that what I saw anyway, that the upcoming meetings, you know, what is coming up is on, is definitely, you know, online. So I could be.
Just one meeting ahead.
Right.
One meeting ahead.
But not
Even
what, for example,
though-
what Brian gave, which is the next 4 to 5
Okay.
meetings,
And
that is
I
not on the
can't-
website.
Okay.
All
All right.
People are speaking from the audience, and
She can,
for yours.
okay, well, maybe that's something then that can change, that if we can, you know, look ahead a little bit. I think given the way that things work is that we can't look ahead a lot because we don't have, you know, all the information from the developers, and we need that in order to plan the meetings. So I think that we can do the best we can with that. So those are just a few of my comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Catherine?
I guess I'm going to start with what I think are some transparency measures that I think would help us better communicate to the public the good work that we do. Because I do think a lot of the frustration that we've been receiving from the public is less about us not doing our job than us not communicating well what we are doing. And to that end, I saw there were some comments about including in our written decisions a summary of the public comment, and I would say that should be both written and at public hearings, and speak to how our findings either address them or how the public comments were not on items under review by the planning board. And I think we should address that head on. Similarly, I think we are so used to getting great memos from the traffic and parking staff on all of the conditions that are going to be included in the special permit in order for the project to meet the criteria. All of the TDM plans, the shuttles, the traffic signalization. We just say, and of course you're going to include everything that's in the traffic and parking memo, right? Yes. And we don't take the time to enumerate what all those things are, and so perhaps the public thinks that we're not getting anything for the special permit, when in fact the developer is making very significant commitments to mitigation in order to give back to the city and make the special permit worth giving. Actually taking the time to list those 6 things or 12 things that are either in traffic and parking or DPW memos or any of those things we get that we all read ahead of time and we understand are included, I think we need to say them out loud. It's important to communicate that to the public. Similarly, in terms of transparency, I agree as much as it is frustrating to have to keep everybody on a clock. I think the clock works better if everybody can see the clock. And investing in a countdown timer that both the speaker and the board can see how much time is left would improve confidence that everybody is getting treated equally and that the developer is also being held to the time that they've been assigned. With the understanding that, of course, the developer gets the time for their proposal, but then we'll necessarily be talking longer because we will ask them questions. But in terms of their initial proposal, they should be held to a time, it should be stated up front what it is, and people should see that they are held to it. I agree with the comment made earlier that it would be good to see a formalized process for neighborhood groups or other interested neighbors pooling their time. I think we benefit greatly when neighbors get together ahead of time, think through what points they want to make, and present them in a clear and coherent form. And then I would also say that I think we need to do not only just a much better job with the website, but a better job of getting all of the material, including public comments, up on the website. And I would commend to the staff regulations.gov. Now, God knows I'm not usually a proponent of saying the federal government does something great. Regulations.gov may be the one exception to that, and it is a fabulous website where you can see the docket for any pending regulation or pending permit if you're looking for a permit, and it gives not only the primary materials and the supporting materials, but every public comment from every person who's written in, however it is, including transcripts from meetings. And it's organized in a very clear way, and it's hyperlinked, and you can submit comments online directly from it. And it gives a timetable for what's happened to the process so far and what's going to happen. It gives you contact information. It's a very thorough process, website that makes, I think, the whole, and in that process, I mean, if you think ours was hard to understand, federal rulemaking is a whole nother level. And I really think it has made it tremendously more accessible to the public to be heard. And to go back to an earlier point, it makes it easier for the federal staff to then take all the public comment and summarize them, which is required in any federal rulemaking or permit issue. So I think, and it makes it clear to anyone who's reviewing that in fact all of the comments were reviewed and were accurately summarized. I think that's a really, I mean, there are lots of models out there, but that's one I've used in my work, both on the federal side and then representing private clients. That I think works especially well. As I say, there are other ways to do it. I don't think our website does that particularly well. We do not get everything up there that we should. We don't get it up there in a timely manner. And even I like Ted, I tend to prefer to find the stuff on the website. I cannot find everything on the website as quickly as we need to in a meeting, and it feels like I ought to be able to. Couple other things. Yeah, I would like to see changed. I would, as someone who occasionally has to travel for business and often without not much warning, I would love to see the city council adopt the zoning ordinance that would allow us to read the transcripts of a prior meeting and sit on a case. I personally have not participated in either of the AOY special permits that have been so controversial this year, only because I missed the first public hearing on them, and therefore I'm not allowed to vote. You know, not that I cherish having being part of a board that is under as much fire as has sometimes been the case, but I want people to know that, like, I'm not stepping away from that fight. I'm not allowed to because sometimes I have to miss a meeting when I travel, and the city council could change that. They have consistently chosen not to. I would like to see that changed. It would make it easier to get a quorum. It would make scheduling easier for staff, and it could help a lot of this go a lot more smoothly. I do want to echo what Hugh said about clarifying the issue of whether or not when a plan or application meets the special permit criteria, if we are to presume that it has satisfied the criteria that it is in the public interest. That has also always been my understanding. That's my understanding from reading the statute and from the case law. If it is not what the city council intends, and I think it could very well be at odds with state law, and a solution to that should be pursued. I don't feel that that is something we are at liberty to change. But if there is direction on that from higher source. I would be open to that because I do think it is a source of great frustration to the public who comes to us and expects that we have more discretion to deny a permit that meets the criteria than I think the board believes we do. And certainly than I believe we do. It's not, and it may come across as we don't hear you or we don't take into consideration all the concerns you brought. And we certainly hear you. We consider those things we're allowed to consider under the criteria. And if it meets the criteria, my understanding of the law is that it gets the special permit. If that's not how we're supposed to be deciding these cases, I need to hear that from, our appointing authority, from the city council, and probably from the state, because that is my understanding of what a special permit is and how it is distinct from a variance. Just one last thing I want to say is about context. Context is really important in terms of considering the urban design of a particular building and how the materials fit in and how the landscaping relates to the area and what the windows are like, and a lot of those really important touches that can help create a more livable community and a better place. Context is not, for me at least, a permit by permit consideration when it comes to the scale of a project. That to me should be done through zoning. If you are saying that a project is just too big in that it's too many units, it's too many square feet, the FAR is too big, that to me is a planning consideration. It's absolutely important for the planning board and the city council to decide and look at on a citywide and neighborhood basis, but it is not appropriate to revisit that on a permit by permit basis. And people have the right to expect when they submit an application for a special permit that they have certain vested property rights if they comply with the zoning. And they are complying with the zoning when they get a special permit that meets the criteria. And again, that is the distinction between a special permit and a variance. If you meet the criteria with a special permit, it is complying with the zoning. So I think that's important for folks to understand. I'm all for context when it comes to urban design and how the building meets the street, and are the materials appropriate, and are the windows the right height. But in terms of the scale of the building, I really think that has to be dealt with on a zoning basis, not a project by project basis. That's all I have now.
Guess no one's required this.
No. I'm one of the newer members of the board, so my fellow board members have spoken most eloquently about particulars raised tonight. I just want to try to adhere to the 3-minute rule myself here. Speak about 3 points inspired by the professor. I want to speak about democracy. I think the most exciting part of the planning board for me is actually the raw democratic process that happens here, the conversation that happens here. And I agree entirely with Jan. We're in the 21st century now. Why is it necessary that we all have to be here in order to have that conversation? We have marvelous machines and technology, which could mean that we could have a broader demographic than we usually see here opining on issues of planning. People who might have families, people who might not have cars, people who might work at night could participate in this great conversation. And we could make that democracy even more beautiful. I want to talk about design because I believe fundamentally that design matters. It changes the way that we interact with each other. It changes the way that a city feels about itself. It changes our values. I believe it can affect our values. It can affect our discourse. I believe it absolutely matters. But I will also tell you this, that this planning board member understands that we're planning for growth. this city is going to grow. It has to grow. That's a fundamental value that we have in the United States of America. This economy will transform and it will grow, or this city will die. So we are planning for growth here. And that change is sometimes uncomfortable. And that's why the conversation can get salty, and that's why we can disagree. But make no bones about it. That's, in fact, what is happening in this room. And it better be what is happening in this room, or this city will cease to exist. The last thing I want to talk about is civics, actually. And related to civics, and it's something that I believe in my core, in my heart, my most beautiful moments on this planet have been when I've been involved in things that relate to civics. And that's a word that also contains civilization. It also contains the word civil. So the lowest moments are when the conversation is not civil in this room. And those are the moments when I think, you know what? I have a lot of other interests. I have a lot of other ways in which I contribute to this community, and maybe I should spend the hours in those other activities rather than in here. And tonight there was a moment when it wasn't civil. And no one stood up. No one from the public, no one from the staff, and none of my fellow board members have yet to point this out, but I know they're all feeling it. They're too polite. What was questioned was whether we had the public interest in our hearts. And that really hurts when somebody gets up in public and tells me that this chairman does not have the public interest in his. What do you think he's doing here? What do you think he's done here for decades? And I'm not going to sit here and let that comment go by unanswered. I'm sorry. I will not. What do you think my fellow citizens on this board are here for? What is their interest? It's a rhetorical question. I don't need an answer. I've exceeded my 3 minutes.
Put me on the timer, please. The logistical issues are many, and so I won't go over them, but there are many, many logistical issues that people have talked about and mentioned. Is this microphone working well?
Yeah.
Quite well. So I'm not going to go over the tables, the PowerPoints, the information technology to reach the public. We don't have it. Hugh, I'm going to bring up an issue that I think we're dancing around a lot, and we haven't yet really put our finger on it, but I want to surface it from my perspective, and that is this issue that somehow that renters are not good for the city, that renters are transients, and that renters don't bring social capital to the city, and that disturbs me right to my core. I rent. So I think we're stereotyping people. And I think one of the things we're doing is we're saying no more apartments, no more renters. And I think that we need to take a good hard look at that. And I'd be the first one willing to say, boy, was I wrong about that. But I don't think I am. The proactive role from CDD, that's important enough for me to say. I think what we see is tremendous, and I'd like to see more. And again, the logistical issues, the PowerPoints, the things like that. And I want to mention that the need to have inclusive, transparent, participatory process before issues come to this board is critical. So we have to make that happen. We have to figure out how to do it. If it costs money, we have to figure out how to get the money to do it. But it has to happen. And let me give you the example. The building being built where the Gourmet Express used to be was one of my favorite stores. It never came before the planning board. You didn't have to. So whatever's being built there, you haven't reviewed, we haven't reviewed. So I think that's a problem. And I think maybe a proponent said, I'm not going there. I'm going to build something that's by right. And maybe we lost something. And you can all keep your game faces on, but if you've been in Cambridge, you'll know that one of the things we do here is when things don't turn out the way we want them to turn out, someone will say, excuse me, I have a problem with the process. And I think that's one of the things that's happening here as well.
Batting cleanup.
You always call it cleanup, and it feels like batting ninth. You know, my colleagues have had so much to say. I'm only going to look for a couple of points, not because I think they're the most important, but just because I think that perhaps they may be the only points that haven't been emphasized. But I would just say that usually in discussions, conversations like this, I tend to focus on what I've done wrong or what I can do better. It works real well with my wife. It might work here as well. But first of all, on communications, again, I don't want to go into the details, but John Hawkinson's memo hit on a lot of good points. Really nitty-gritty points about how the website and other elements of our communications could be improved. And I think it's really worth taking a hard look at those points. One item on communication is broadcasting. I'm a developer by trade, and I work in a lot of towns and cities over the years. And virtually every municipality in which I work, the planning board meetings are broadcast. They're televised.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, these are towns where the population of the whole town is about the same as my block in Cambridge. And somehow or another, they can pull together the resources to broadcast. And I think that's really something we should be doing here. One other quick point. It's been pointed out that by the time the developers come into us, their plans are pretty much fully baked. While we speak freely in our critiques and our wishes and so forth, it's nevertheless kind of hard to get them to backpedal because they've taken the design as far as they've already taken it. Not only is it difficult to them, but in our hearts of hearts, we try to be reasonable as well, and we have a little bit of a hard time telling them, scratch the whole thing, go back to the planning board. Because, so to speak. And we know that they've gone through a lot of process. They've met with staff. They've done all sorts of things. So I certainly echo the general sentiment that the review with the public and maybe even with the board should begin at an earlier stage where we're just dealing with some sort of schematic concept of what the idea is, and at that very early stage, we can hear from them where they're thinking, and they can hear from us, and then the same sort of process with the public. But probably most important is that sort of process with the staff. Now, I don't know what that process exactly is with the staff. I don't know when they come in and speak to staff. I don't know who they speak to. I don't know what kind of feedback the staff gives them at that point. And that leads me to two thoughts. First of all, I think that we as a board should be having some sort of ongoing working sessions, working relationship with the staff, so that we can understand better what they do, when they do it, and how they do it. So we can exchange with staff some of our general approaches to planning. As you pointed out, Hugh, that because of the nature of this city and the resources we have, that it's really the staff that does more of the planning function. But we are part of that function, and I don't know what their philosophy and outlook is on planning. But nor do they know entirely ours. And one of the most important things that the staff can do in meeting with developers is not only to give their own independent and professional feedback on the developers, but also to predict how the planning board is going to react. But it's difficult to predict how the planning board is going to react unless we have a better working relationship so we can actually discuss planning issues. Yeah, and we can give the staff some feedback about what we're looking for. And it would be great, you know, to sort of lay that foundation for the relationship, so that we don't, you know, have to begin that relationship way down the road when, after the developers already come in with their fully baked proposal. And just on one other, more of a detailed sort of thing, it's brought up from time to time, peer review. Especially on traffic, but on other things. I mean, you know, flooding has been a big issue that the public has been concerned about, and I think doesn't you know, fully understand, and sometimes we don't fully understand it. I think there are a number of reasons for peer review. And for those folks who may not be familiar with the concept, I mean, that's really when the city actually engages a third party professional, an engineer, typically to review some element of the application. The tab is ordinarily picked up by the applicant. I think certainly a peer review from time to time can help inform and educate us. But again, in dealing with the public process and pointing out, you know, that we are going through a period with the public confidence in our process is at something of a low. I think it would enhance the credibility of our process and contribute to the perceived integrity of the process to have an independent third-party professional review some of the more important engineering issues. And that's typically traffic, but actually in the courthouse there were various other issues that were brought up, and I think from time to time that would be appropriate. Overall, I agree with my colleagues that we work hard, we're committed to the public interest. We may not always agree what is in the public interest in a given instance, but we are 1,000% committed to the public interest. As I frequently said, we have a sort of funny role because, you know, it is a quasi-judicial role. We're not elected politicians, you know, where we can freely make policy or enact planning. Our job is to implement existing planning and to enforce existing zoning. So, I mean, we have to work within those constraints. I mean, the worst thing that you would ever want is a board that feels free to do whatever they subjectively feel like in any particular case. That might cut in favor of your, you know, particular views in this case, but it might cut against them in the next one. You know, that's not what we want to do. We want to act as professionals, and we want to act within the four corners of the law. So yeah, I think we do work hard and we do a pretty good job. But as I said, I'd rather focus on what we could do a whole lot better, and I think there are a lot of areas where we can do a whole lot better.
So I've got it all worked out. So on the, ordinarily we meet the first and the third Tuesdays, and then now we're at the fourth Tuesday for deliberation. So on the second Tuesday, we'll have that'll be devoted to the long public hearing. And then the fifth Tuesday will be devoted to previews of coming projects. And the sixth Tuesday will be devoted to talking with the staff about planning.
Second.
So that's the challenge.